Good evening. We begin our program with the top news stories of the day. In the Northern Karabakh regions, battles continue between Azerbaijan and Armenia, and more than 100 people have died. The Russian army is introducing a new insignia. In the Carpathians, there are a number of people from Vietnam that are trying to move through this country to Western Europe. The Moscow State Symphonic Orchestra is celebrating its 50th anniversary today. 1993 was filled with a number of tremendous changes and wars in our country. Over the last few days, battles continued in the Nagorno-Karabakh region in the northern areas. According to the press service of the Nagorno-Karabakh military, it appears that more than 100 people have lost their lives in the last 48 hours. In the last few days, there have been embittered battles between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The National Army has been making tremendous attempts to take over several territories in Azerbaijan. However, they have not been all that successful. Here at this one refugee camp, there are 40 people who are waiting for the battles to subside. The Azerbaijani army continues to make efforts to move further into the territory of Armenia, but they are meeting with very little success as the Armenian divisions are putting up a great fight. According to the Defense Ministry, both sides are experiencing significant losses. Military experts do not expect that the battles will wane in the near future. In fact, the Armenians say that they are able to conduct very successful military maneuvers against the Azerbaijanis, and the war continues. Although New Year's is just around the corner, as one walks down the streets of Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, it's hard to imagine that New Year's is just a couple of days away. There are no Christmas trees or any decorations to indicate that the holidays are here. In fact, it's quite the opposite. In the stores, all of the shop shelves are empty, and even the few goods that are there are hardly desirable. The only place where one can acquire anything is at the market, but only those who have a lot of money are able to purchase fresh fruits and vegetables there. However, there is one Christmas tree in a downtown square. This is perhaps only one sign of the hope of the new year. There's great tension in the streets, but nonetheless the Georgian people seem to be full of optimism, both in terms of politics and in their own private lives for the new year. In any case, people have great hope that there might be some joy in the next year. Russian border troops have been subjected to mortar shelling along the Tajikistan-Afghanistan border. This was the 11th and 12th divisions of the Russian army were affected. The Tajikistan Ministry of Internal Foreign Affairs and the National Islamic Movement of Afghanistan have held consultations to deal with the repatriation of Tajik refugees that are living in Afghanistan right now. There are 50,000 Tajikistan refugees that left the republic in the beginning of the civil war in 1992. On the 31st of December, the curfew will be lifted in Tajikistan. This was according to a report by Itar Tas. They say this is related to the stability of the situation in the region. However, one Russian political scientist said that it is hardly stable there at all. In fact, quite the opposite is true, that the republic is a hotbed of tension, fraught with bloodshed and war. It is quite possible that further conflicts will continue in Tajikistan, as well as regions such as Northern Caucasus, Ukraine, Northern Kazakhstan, and in the Povolzhia region. The Russian military is planning to introduce new symbolism and a new insignia into its uniforms and decor. The army was started 300 years ago under Peter the Great, and if we return to many of the parades that were once held in Run Square, the Russian army always, in fact, from the time of Peter I, each individual division had its own symbolism, but the one thing that brought them all together and unified them was the insignia. Now they've adopted a new insignia after a competition for which 300 different options were submitted, but the one that was chosen was a two-headed eagle holding a laurel wreath and a sword, representing the glory of the history of the Russian army and its ability to defend the country. In the middle of the eagle is a horseman embodying good and conquering over the dragon of evil. The insignia will be on the uniforms, banners, and flags of the Army and the Navy, as well as depicted on heavy equipment and the stationery of the military. But what about the stars on soldiers' uniforms? Well, they'll remain, and those who consider these leftovers of the Soviet power should be reminded that these stars, the five-pointed stars, were introduced under Alexander I in the first half of the 19th century. Housewarming parties were always a tradition around New Year's times. And in this town of Orenburg, they're being reintroduced. Nikolai Dorogovsev and his family, for example, for 16 years did not have their own apartment. But in 1993, they finally were optimistic, as when his airborne unit division was withdrawn from the Baltic states and transferred to Orenburg, his family was able to receive an apartment. For many months they had lived without pay and lived in military barracks in the Baltics. Luckily, the Ministry of Defense was able to provide them with an apartment in this new housing complex. In fact, there are 150 apartments in this building, and it is expected that in 1994 there will be another 100 available for members of the military. As for economic hopes for the next year, the Ministry of Economics says that the real profit of Russians will drop by 3 to 5%. And 33% of the population of Russia, that is 49 million people, will have an average salary that is less than subsistence wage, and unemployment will rise from 4 to 7 million. According to the State Committee on Status, as it is called, in 1993, the drop in production was 16% and GDP dropped by 11%. The decline in production was seen primarily in the chemical industry, and drop in salaries was marked in oil and gas. As of the 1st of January, freely convertible currency will no longer be permitted in Russia. All transactions must be made in non-cash or credit card methods. This is the way it's done around the world. While some prices in some stores will remain in dollars, well, we're not opposed to stores, if they wish, to continue to indicate their prices in dollars. But each of these stores that decide to do so will be required to hang a piece of paper in the window that indicates the exchange rate of the US dollar, German marks, etc. After all, those currencies are relatively stable. What about employees that receive their salaries in dollars? Well, only employees of foreign companies will have the right to receive their salaries in dollars. If a company is a Russian company, then this company cannot pay its employees in dollars. As for foreign companies, they can give their employees hard currency directly into their checking accounts. They cannot give them cash in hand, but can deposit this money in their accounts. According to specialists, the exchange rate of the dollar will grow more slowly. In Russia for 1993, it was very difficult to bring a halt to the drop in production, which amounted to 10 to 12% of the national income. Therefore, it's very difficult to imagine that the value of the ruble will stabilize this upcoming year. Today, the Council of Ministers held its regular meeting, but perhaps it was the shortest of the year. It amounted to only providing a New Year's greeting to the Premier. Many serious problems remain on the agenda, however, such as socioeconomic issues, especially the support of small businesses and labor protection issues. There are many changes to be expected for the new year in Ukraine and on the Crimea. The Phaton company is a scientific firm which is trying to make manufactured goods. They're producing such things such as microwave ovens, televisions, 50-channel satellite receivers, and antennas. They're able to produce these goods at a lower cost than similar goods around the world. And they're being sold not for dollars, but for the Ukrainian coupon. the reason they've had to shift to these new consumer goods is that the demand for the typical consumer goods is much lower, and the Ukraine has been experiencing an energy crisis. In Crimea, by decree of the Supreme Soviet, there will be a so-called open economy there, providing greater access to foreign companies and foreign investors. The Voronezh airport aircraft building industry is looking forward to the new year. They will be producing the IL-96M, which is capable of holding more than 300 passengers at a time and can carry these passengers over a distance of 7,000 sea miles. Voronezh has opened a branch in Moscow with the Moscow Commercial Bank, and the support of the bank is making it possible for the Voronezh aircraft manufacturing company to fulfill their contracts on a timely basis. The manufacturing company is very happy to receive the support from the Moscow Bank because it's making it possible for the employees of this company to maintain their current standard of living, and they expect that their lifestyles will not worsen for 1994. The company has contracts already for 1994. Among them, the IL-96M will be produced and will likely be used in international airways. Well, hopefully this will be the case as long as we don't have to face a hike in taxes, both on our profits and on our regular income. And we're also hoping that we won't face problems with fuel resources. The government expects that the inflation rate for 1994 will increase twofold and that the budget deficit will be 5% of the gross domestic product. For several days, the well-known person, Dmitry Yukabolsky, has been interrogated for war on crimes. He's had negotiations with various lawyers, including Alexei Katenkov, and it appears that the picture is becoming clearer, and that is that the investigative team is anticipating that they will have to travel as far as Canada to clarify this matter. The Carpathians are on our border 4 different European countries, and it's no surprise that there are so-called nomads here that are making efforts to travel to the west. These include many people from Southeast Asia. For example, a truck carrying champagne was passing the border, and it appeared that this truck contained 80 different people from Southeast Asia who were hoping to take advantage of the fact that they could have gone over the border and traveled into Western Europe. Many people tried to take advantage of diplomatic passports, which are a so-called green light to the West. However, all these efforts for Vietnamese and other people to escape to the West has not been successful. In Uzhgorod, 26 people were seized. They had hoped to travel from Vietnam through Ukraine, Slovakia, Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic, and enter Germany. Despite all the troubles in our country, there are many people that are determined to uphold all our traditions surrounding the new year. Many people, despite the difficulties, still have smiles on their faces. After all, we never know what will come tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. But in Moldova, many troubles have faced the people there. They had a very good harvest this year, but due to political problems and an early frost, millions of crops were lost. They also faced great difficulties in obtaining energy resources. They had a drop in production as well as a drop in the standard of living across the boards. Despite this fact, parliamentarians, economists, and the average people on the street hope that the new year will bring improvements in their country. They hope that by introducing privatization programs, the standards of living will rise for the citizens of the country. As As is typical at the end of the year, the World Bank often publishes a list of the state of various countries around the world, as well as the income of the population. In 1993, among the richest were Switzerland, Luxembourg, Japan, Sweden, the United States, Denmark, and Germany, as well as Finland. The poorest country in the world was declared to be Mozambique. In the former Soviet Union, Belarus was considered the best off, with a national income of $2,900. And Estonia was second with $2,750. According to polls, the Americans seem to be the most optimistic around the world. 65% of them are confident that the new year will bring improvements in their standard of living. 1993 was a year of change and hope for the United States. Bill Clinton, a Democratic president, was elected after 12 years of Republican leadership. His victory in August was perhaps the most important one when the Senate agreed, though by a one-vote difference, agreed to the budget deficit reduction plan, as well as to a tax increase, the largest for the United States. Increased government regulation in the United States is not called socialism, however, like it is in our country. There were great difficulties surrounding the NAFTA agreement. Many hot debates continued throughout the hot summer in D.C. Les Aspin resigned as the Secretary of Defense in December of 1993, and he has not been forgiven for U.S. humiliations in Somalia. The director of the FBI was fired by Bill Clinton himself. Many people have lost their trust in the government. Crime is on the rise. More than 100,000 policemen have been introduced to the police force. In November, the Brady Bill was brought into law, and it's made it difficult for people to purchase firearms. However, this only seems to pertain to firearms, for people continue to consume more and more all the time. In fact, the fact that many people have decided to purchase new automobiles is an indication of the fact that Americans are optimistic about their economy. Time is flying fast. It's only been 1 year since Czechoslovakia divided into two countries and disappeared from the face of the European map and became two new countries. In the Czech Republic, economic reforms have come to an end. Almost the entire economy has been privatized, including banks, various companies, and the service industry. And privatization is providing more than 1/2 of the national income. The class administration says that political and economic and social stability has been achieved, and that the Czech crown has been stable for the last 12 months. Inflation rates and unemployment rates are the lowest throughout Europe. Well, let's look at Slovakia. Unemployment there is 3.5 times higher, the inflation rate is rather high, and the cost of goods is creating tremendous social pressure. The euphoria of Slovakia's sovereignty has long since passed. The government is being criticized for the lack of consistency in the economic reforms that have been conducted over the past year. The parliament is not working successfully, despite the fact that early elections were held. There isn't stability in the country, and many people feel that as a result of all this, the Czech Republic won and Slovakia lost. But the most important thing is that there has been a certain success here for both for Czechs and for Slovaks, that this is the first division of a country that took place without bloodshed and in a peaceful manner. This is an important example for the world overall. There's a scandal in the United States that continues to be published in the New York Times newspaper. This is pertaining to the super-secret report about a commission on nuclear energy, whereby a study was conducted to examine the effects of radiation and chemicals on the human body. Apparently, there were 1,000 test subjects that partook in this study, and 600 died of typhoid. All the other victims will likely be paid a hefty compensation by the U.S. government. Official relations between Israel and the Vatican have improved today by a signing today in the Vatican. There was a delegations from both sides met in order to sign the documents. After 2,000 years of history, there's a new page in Jewish and Christian relations. The Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Israel, Beilin, said this today at their meetings. After the signing, the President of Israel Weizmann and John Paul II decided that they would exchange diplomatic representatives between the two countries, and over time their posts would be raised to ambassador posts and not just diplomatic representatives. In Cairo today, President of Egypt Hosni Mubarak met with the chairman of the executive committee of the PLO, Yasser Arafat. The Egyptian president said that there are still great differences between the PLO and Egypt, and at least 2 to 3 more weeks of negotiations will be required in order to remove some of the barriers to agreement. The PLO has clearly rejected any Israeli proposals that are being discussed at the negotiations. The United States is gradually withdrawing its troops from Somalia. 400 U.S. troops left from Mogadishu today, and the remaining 9,000 are supposed to be withdrawn from Somalia by March of 1994. Military experts, however, fear that once the withdrawal is complete, then Somalia will face continued inter-clan clashes. FBI agents arrested 2 people that were under suspicion of participating in the organization of terrorist acts in the northern part of in upstate New York. Apparently, there were 4 self-made bombs that were sent by mail that exploded and took 5 lives. Michael Stevens and Ella Figla, if convicted, will likely face the death penalty. Today in Lithuania, central newspapers published resolutions of the government in terms of their recommendations and foreign policies for the upcoming year. They intend to become members of NATO, work closely with other Baltic regions to support regional security, improve their economic ties with the countries of the CIS, support democratic reforms in Russia. This statement was made by an official representative of the White House, David Johnson, but the cause for his statement was likely Vladimir Zhirinovsky, who continues to shock the West with his anti-Semitic statements, which, according to the U.S. Department of State, are very xenophobic in nature and inflammatory and extremist. The Bulgarian President Zheliv said at a press conference today that Zhirinovsky is a true fascist and that his approaches toward creating an empire is very typical of imperialists in the early part of the 20th century. In an ideal world, Jews would be condemned to an island so that the borders of their country would be sea borders. Take an island like Cyprus or Madagascar. Anything to keep the Jews away from the rest of the world. After all, how on earth can we possibly teach Arabs to love Jews if they've been enemies for thousands of years? An explosive fire destroyed a 2-story synagogue in the Yeshilov Institute in Moscow on the 2nd Vyacheslavsky Street today. No one died in the fire. However, it still isn't clear whether it was an accidental fire or started by arson. An investigation is underway. Despite the fact that there isn't much optimism in the country, holiday preparations are underway, and many people are looking forward to the New Year holidays. In the German journal Stern, there was an article published on some of the richest people around the world and the type of gifts they were giving. The Sultan of Bern, the wealthiest man in the world, decided to decorate his 10-meter Christmas tree not with gifts and toys, but rather with 1.5 thousand flasks of Paul Picasso perfume. Also, Donald Trump, one of the scandalous and wealthiest and well-known people in the world, bought his wife a 600-carat diamond ring. The International Confederation of Theater Unions has invited children from a nearby orphanage to visit exhibits at the Yamal Yermolov Museum. Here at the museum, they are able to dress up in costumes and make their own Christmas decorations and live in a world where there are no TVs or Snicker bars. This is always a very touching holiday for us and makes it possible for us to bring all these children together and experience the museum of Yermal Yermolov. Our festivities or preparations there began in September, thanks to the assistance that was rendered by the Alpha Bank Association. New Year's is a classical family holiday, and we think it's very important to create a family atmosphere here. There's a special magical cupboard here and magical performances that are put on to make the children feel at home as if they're part of a large family. Presents, cookies, and other gifts will be exchanged, and it is quite likely that these children will remember this holiday for many, many years in their lives. Gifts are always exchanged at New Year's: books, sweets, toys, and you can even give someone your good mood. And especially if you visit the Hermitage Theater, where Alice in Wonderland is being performed, you'll have the opportunity to travel through Wonderland with Alice at no cost. The tickets are free so that children can all experience the joy of Alice in Wonderland. For those parents who find it difficult to bear the costs of purchasing gifts in stores and things, will have the opportunity to bring their children to the Hermitage Theater to take pleasure and joy in watching Alice in Wonderland. It's quite clear that charity has always been a very important part of the Russian soul, and this performance indicates that. Champagne and caviar has always been an integral part of the holiday times. Even Napoleon I had a preference for black caviar from Russia, and this black caviar is still popular in France today. However, there's a scandal going on. Every year we export 80 tons of black caviar to France, but apparently the same amount is being exported illegally by tourists, workers of Aeroflot, and diplomats. It appears that there is a large black market for black caviar, and people feel that this is simply poaching of the Caspian Sea. However, the French always say the more caviar and women, the better. Among all the festivities in France, there's a festival called the Miss France Festival being held. It's a magical competition in which there are 40 women participating from various regions in France and France's maritime territories. Various dances were held, and the women wore spectacular hats and gowns in order to determine who would finish in first place and be declared Miss France. Throughout the course of the competition, it was quite challenging for the jury to make up their minds, for all the women were beautifully dressed. But finally they picked their candidate. And in the end, Miss France of 1994 was selected, and she's depicted in the front of the screen with Miss France of 1993. Well, we would have been able to finish our story here, but there was another competition just down the street. This was the so-called alternative Miss France competition, where the women, of course, were not dressed in beautiful ballroom gowns, but rather in their skimpy swimsuits. So there's great debate as to whether or not this Miss France is the true Miss France, or the one who was in her ballroom gown. Maybe it's not so important after all. Maybe it doesn't matter that there's one or two Miss Frances. After all, the more beauty, the better. Anyone who was born before New Year's was lucky. But in any case, the Moscow State Symphonic Orchestra that was founded in 1943 has always played an important role in our lives for those born before and after New Year's. The orchestra was founded during wartime, and it has gone through many difficulties. However, it is an organization that provides great joy for our people. Among the directors are Gennady Rozhdestkinsky, Udanova, Eric Lausk, and others. Pavel Kogan is currently the chief director of the orchestra, and he brings tremendous joy both to the musicians and to the music lovers. And although we all recognize the problems of today, we can't forget that the orchestra lived through the difficulties of the war period, and this is nothing in comparison to this. I, Mr. Kogan, would like to wish my orchestra the best for the new year and hope that they will continue to persist in becoming fine musicians. These are all the stories of today. I'd like to say goodbye. Sports and weather follows. Attention to all shareholders of the public stock company, MMM. The shareholders of MMM stock will receive dividends for the fourth quarter of this year with a 1,000% annual rate. You can receive your dividends in Moscow at the Warszawskie Chaussee number 26. We are open daily with the exception of Saturday and Sunday from 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Minotep Bank combines intellectual and financial resources to support investment in Russian industry. Minotep is the #1 investment bank. Smile more often this year. Most Bank. Moscow real estate is the most profitable way to invest your vouchers. Moscow real estate makes it possible to bring regular and reliable dividends on your stock. You can come to any local post office in order to purchase your share of stock. The Moscow real estate is always available to you. Hockey tournaments around the world continue. Today at 11:20 p.m. on Channel 1, you can see the hockey championships in Dusseldorf, the European Cup. Moscow Dynamo team will play against the Finnish team TPS. Good evening. Let's continue on hockey for a moment. The world competition in Czechoslovakia, the Russians finished in a draw against Canada. 3-3 was the final score. The Swedish team is in the lead and hasn't lost a single goal to any other team. At New Year's, it's always typical for us to sum up the year and issue congratulations. The chairman of the Russian Federation of Physical Education and Athletics, Valery Sosny, says that he's very grateful to all the hockey players and all the other athletes from Russia who have performed so admirably throughout the year. I'd especially like to thank the administration of the Physical Education Department who have provided support for culture and athletics throughout the year. I'd also like to congratulate Chuvash for introducing new laws on physical education, and I would like to thank those who worked together on the new constitution to support a federal program on physical education, and I'd like to congratulate all those who were involved in developing the concept that provides the basis for this new program. And I hope that the mood among Russians for 1994 will be a mood in favor of supporting continued athletics throughout the remaining year. Oleg Romantsov has been named the best soccer player of the year for 1993. Today is the third stage of the Paris-Dakar-Paris race. The Spaniard is in the lead for motorcycles, a Frenchman for automobiles, and the Russians are hanging in there. The drivers have left the European continent today and are beginning their traverse through Africa. Minotep Bank combines intellectual and financial resources to invest in Russian industry. Minotep is the #1 investment bank. On the 3rd of December 1992, MMM Invest registered itself in Moscow, and on December 3rd, 1993, MMM Invest became officially registered in Brussels, Belgium. We're already beginning to turn your vouchers into gold. revive the future through the Russian Credit Bank. SP Intercommerce provides marking guns, digital cash registers, and scales. Call us in Moscow 150-9856, in St. Petersburg 234-3782. And the weather for the 31st of December in the Murmansk Oblast, Arkhangelsk Oblast, Karelia, the Central Region, Central Black Earth Region, Middle Volga, Northern Caucasus, Ukraine, Belarus, Armenia, Azerbaijan, St. Petersburg, and Moscow.